Welcome back, Principal Matters podcast listeners. This is Dr. Jen Schwanke with my co-host Will Parker, and this, Will, is episode 476.
Yes.
Wow, we're getting up there, and this episode is with my friend Steve Ventura, and you guys are really gonna like this.
He's a legend.
Yeah, he's a legend, and he points out the significant issues like unethical and morale destroying impact of ignoring substandard teaching and many other things. So excited about this conversation. But before we do that, Will, we're going to do our customary super fun Q&A, a 5-minute snippet where you and I kind of unprepared talk about a question. So are you ready? I'm going to throw this question at you.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So this came from a listener who says, bluntly, I'm struggling with a new teacher responding to constructive feedback. Suggestions? So What do we do when we're giving a teacher constructive feedback and they're not having it?
This is so hard because you know how many questions I want to ask. So without all the context, let me just give a few thoughts, Jen, and then I'd love to hear your feedback too. First thought is, what are the protocols or systems or schedules or intentional ways that you're interacting with this teacher so that he or she knows that you are invested in them, you're committed to them, you're there for them, you're available, so it's not just a flyby, so that when you are providing feedback, they realize it's within the context of the same intentions that you give across the school, and that doesn't mean that you can give all of your time to one classroom. But I would start there, Jen, that people, at least I think for me, receiving constructive feedback happens better within the context of a trusting relationship. And a lot of times, trusting relationships are built through intentional interaction. So I'll start there. What are you thinking?
Well, the first thing I thought when reading this question was, be patient. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like when I had to tell my son 14 times to pick up his wet towels. He just didn't get it the first time. He just didn't. And so there's a fine line between giving it multiple times in a different modality and being persistent about it. A fine line between that and nagging, right? We don't want to nag. But learning a concept is different than communicating a message. And what I mean by that is the person communicating can't assume that right away someone's going to learn that. So there's that, the deep learning, adult learning theory that tells us we have to kind of interleave our feedback and our criticism. All of that is to say, I would recommend that this principal continue to give the constructive feedback, continue to say, I am on your side. I am here to help. This is not punitive. This is what we're going to need from you going forward. And, lead with that warm demander mindset. You can't just repeat the same thing 3 times. You have to basically give different distinct sets of the feedback.
I would also just encourage leaders to, and again, every context is different, but if the context allows, making sure that this teacher has a mentor teacher who's also being able to provide feedback to them, because peer feedback is often just so much easier than feedback from somebody that you see as evaluative or somebody that your administrator, quote unquote. Sorry, Jen, but I just have to speak from personal experience. So when I think back to my very first year of teaching, I really am grateful that my leaders did 3 things. 1, they scheduled time to be in my room for feedback. 2, they assigned me an older teacher who could mentor me and look at my syllabus and talk content and curriculum with me. Well, 3, they put me on a team with other teachers so that we were constantly sharing information with each other. And I was kind of the new guy. And so I was watching them model collaboration. And I guess the 4th thing, and this wasn't even formal, but another teacher close to my age befriended me. And he would make sure to grab me at lunch and just catch up with me, ask me questions, give me feedback, and coach me. He didn't call it that, but that's what he was doing. And so all of those supports were just such important parts of supporting me in my first year, Of course, I also had the privilege of being married to an educator like you. So, debriefing at home, but man, kind of just remembering that new teacher, especially in the context of this question, we were all that new teacher, and being new is hard. And so I think I'm just bringing it full circle to what you said earlier, which is be patient, show grace, try to remember what it's like to be building the capacity and the experience towards something, because it gets better over time.
Right.
If
Right.
you,
And there are the non-negotiables. If you're giving constructive feedback and it needs to happen, you do have the power position to say, you know what, I've now mentioned it 3 or 4 times. Kids aren't safe, or feedback isn't happening. Whatever, there are times you have to say, now it's a mandate,
Mhm. Yeah,
and go down that road.
and sometimes you have to model. We've
That's
done
right.
that too, where you have to
That's right.
say, "Let me show you how we're
Right.
gonna do the
Right.
situation too." All right, well, we can unpack this question in so many other ways, but I appreciate the question, and I wanna make sure we have time to jump into your wonderful interview with Steve Ventura. So, Principal Matters listeners, you can stay connected with all of our resources at my website at williamdparker.com. And Jen, if they want to stay connected with you in your newsletter, how can they do that?
Yep, they can find me at jenschwanke.com. Jenschwanke.com, everything's there.
All right. We hope you enjoyed today's wonderful conversation. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but how do you actually get the right results and know the best next steps? The secret is iExcel. iExcel helps you easily assess performance and determines the best path forward for each student. Whether you need data for benchmarking or intervention planning, iExcel can do it all. And iExcel doesn't stop at assessments. It also provides you with everything else your school needs, from a standards-aligned K-12 curriculum to actionable analytics. iExcel's online learning and teaching platform is research proven to improve student outcomes, and it's used by 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. If you want to start driving real progress, get started today at iexcel.com/PM.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Welcome, Principal Matters podcast listeners. This is Dr. Jen Schwanke, and I am here today with a very special guest. I'm so happy to bring Steve Ventura to you. Steve is the founder and president of Advanced Collaborative Solutions, ACS. It's a movement that's dedicated to empowering educators and students through collaboration, innovation, and impactful professional learning, with a vision of ensuring that every child, regardless of background, has access to highly effective teachers and leaders. Steve provides practical, research-based strategies to drive meaningful change in education. And so this podcast is for principals, and Steve has experience there too. So his expertise stems from years of experience: a teacher at elementary, middle, and high school, an administrator, an assistant principal, principal, director, and superintendent. And so he takes all of those leadership insights and influences countless educators through keynote presentations, professional development, and national conferences. Steve is also an author of several influential books. I took a little dander over to Amazon, and there's a lot of work out there that Steve has authored, including Achievement Teams: How a Better Approach to PLCs Can Improve Student Outcomes and Collective Efficacy. And by the time this episode airs, his newest ASCD publication, Improving Instruction Together, Leading Achievement Teams and PLCs, will have just been released. So that's a lot to open up. Hi, Steve, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Wow, this better be good.
Right, right. Don't mess it up, Steve. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I set the bar high.
Yes. No, it's a
No, I'm
pleasure to
just
be here.
kidding. Good. I'm glad you are. And tell us, beyond the bio, what do you want us listeners to know about yourself and your work?
Yeah, before I started getting and published, I was doing a lot of professional development around the country, and I was working with Professor John Hattie through the organization Corwin. And this is when I started really figuring out what is visible learning. I didn't understand it until I got trained in it, because I was one of 25 certified at the time North American trainers. And I love the fact that it was nothing more than a control versus treatment group. And it
Right.
was just comparing the impact of practices between students who received it and students who did not. I thought that was fascinating. And
Hmm.
it's a probability statement, it's not like cause and effect. But that was the foundation for a lot of the things I started writing about. Even though I know that some of his research can be very controversial, I still like that it's the largest summary of educational research. And that's where a lot of the motivation comes from when I start writing these things. So yeah, I mean, and I also learned when I was a superintendent, finally, it took me a long time, but once I got to my superintendency, I started figuring out like, what is an instructional leader? What do they do? And so those are some of the things that, are a little bit of the background, but it's been a wonderful ride, I can tell you that.
Right, right. And I'm so glad you're focusing on instructional leadership in a lot of your work because, well, you and I were both at ISTE ASCD this past weekend. By the time this records, it'll be several months out, but we both did some talking on the learning stage, some quick, turbo talks. And instructional leadership was one of the areas that we focused on. And you and I both know that's what we need to talk about. We also know that bigger picture, big umbrella, American education is in a very interesting place. And you have mentioned that it's at a tipping point. And so tell us from your perspective, what are the most critical challenges and opportunities that are facing education right now? And what work are you doing to help our leaders address them?
Yeah, well, it's so broad, but I'll try to narrow it down. I
Right.
think a lot of us got our principalships and leadership positions before we were actually ready for those positions.
Hmm.
And some of the pre-service training we received wasn't really about instructional leadership. I finally understood that leadership isn't about managing a school, it's about leading a community of educators. And so a lot of the things that I focus on are, what do really good instructional leaders do and how do they manage their time for that? I think when principals ignore substandard teaching and they don't address that, that's a huge issue. It's ethically and morally something that has to be addressed, and it doesn't all that time get that. And it breaks my heart because I see that teachers that are the master teachers in the building have their morale destroyed
Hmm.
when principals don't actually assess the entire program. And I also think that if you're a principal, the book is like for principals, instructional coaches, leader is a little bit broad in this term,
Hmm.
but they embrace collaboration. It's something that they look for. And the collaboration is based on research, backed strategies, and then there really is a relentless focus on student achievement. Even though we get pulled in 1,000 different directions, I still think the priority is, how are our students progressing and what do our students need us to learn in order
Right,
to be very effective instructional leaders? So
right.
I see some of those things. There's also one last piece of this, a huge dose of overconfidence bias, where I ask teams where they are, their principals, and they're always on a scale of 1 to 5, we're a 5. And then when you get into the school, it's not a 5. And I think if you're too overly confident in what's going on in your building, then you tend to ignore the things that you really need to learn. That's something that people just don't want to admit, that we're
Right,
not there yet. So,
right.
so those are some of the things. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's part of the tipping point I was talking about.
Right, right. And then you also champion student well-being, cultivating curiosity, building skills for lifelong learning. So how can you integrate, those kind of broader goals into instructional leadership for districts, leaders, principals?
That's a great question too, because I was researching this too a little bit, and I think there are 3 levels of engagement
Hmm.
for students that actually contribute to well-being. Emotional engagement, where
Hmm.
students have a voice and choice. They're more emotionally engaged if they have a menu or they can pick what they want to learn, even though, there's a boundary to that. And cognitive engagement, where the learning is challenging, and understanding that students have to be stuck in order to learn, to climb out of their pit. And I think when students engage cognitively with something, then they're going to be learning. And the thing I get from teachers is they're always concerned about behavioral engagement. And I
Hmm.
tell them, if your kids are emotionally engaged and they're cognitively engaged, you should see fewer behavioral issues. And so I think that those are some of the things that I stress when we talk about instructional strategies and how to actually foster student well being. Plus, Jen, kids who can talk about what they're learning have a really high level of well-being as opposed to kids who can't. They feel like they're
Right.
not part of it. So we always try to, foster that through learning intentions and success criteria, and those types of strategies.
Right. And I'm just thinking as you're talking about the principals who might be listening to this on their way to work. By the way, any principal is listening, you need to know that Steve is recording this at 6 a.m. his time. So if you're driving to work at 6 a.m., you have a friend out there. So Steve's up early too, everyone. But as I think about those principals and um, doing this work, I am drawn back to the title of your most recent book, Improving Instruction Together. That title tells us that collaboration is at the crux of all of this.
Hmm.
So, how and why do you believe that improving instruction together is more effective than a principal's individual efforts? Talk to us about
Got
that
it.
team approach.
Terrific. So, of course, there's a lot of work in the book about collective efficacy, collective leadership efficacy, collective teacher efficacy. But the entire aim of the book is to cultivate a culture of teamwork, like shared responsibility. Like the principal is not the person that has to solve all the problems. And then there's this focus on continuous improvement. I think principals need three main characteristics. This is how we get schools to move. I think there's leadership clarity, leadership consistency, and leadership integrity. And those things, you can't buy. Those are like these are practices.
Right.
And integrity means you do what you say you're going to do. And consistency means that everyone gets the same message and the same support. And I think there's so many of these little subcultures in schools that are allowed to kind of boil over. But I think when you look at the overall content of the book or just the things we're talking about right now, I think the culture of teamwork is based on relational trust. And I was reading a study from Burke Schneider that schools that have high levels of relational trust have a 1 in 2 chance of doing really well with new initiatives. By contrast, without relational trust, it's like a 1 in 7 chance. So there's a lot of culture building that goes on and a lot of trust. But I still think integrity, consistency, and ability from morning till the afternoon is what our leaders should be modeling. I mean, you should get out in front and live the culture you want everybody else to live. I
Right.
think those are
Right.
three key things.
Right. I love those three things. And I'm glad you said the word collective efficacy. I had, of course, like all of us, I had read a couple articles about collective efficacy in a master's program. And then when I started to study it more, it was about 5 years ago, you could have knocked me over with a feather because it's so simple, right? It's just a belief. I always say to people, collective efficacy you can't buy. It's not a software. There's
Right.
not a trainer for it. It's just a belief. And it's so incredibly powerful.
No, it is, and you don't have to make it overcomplicated. I mean,
Mm-mm.
I know there are lots of books and studies about it, but I still think when a group of people come together and they believe that they can positively affect the lives
Hmm.
of the people they're serving together, then you
Right.
you have you have a really good school culture.
Right. And then the opposite, of course, is when someone, the teacher in 137 thinks, well, I'm making a difference, but that yahoo over in 138, he's terrible. He's not doing anything right. And
Mhm.
that's where you have division rather than that collective belief. And then you don't, again, with a divisive culture, nobody will step in to cover your class if needed. And no one will say, hey, let me take that student for a little bit.
Yeah.
There's not that helping mindset.
No, it's terrific. It's a great explanation. It's a way to sum it up. I mean, I don't want to. You're terrific the way you rephrased it. It's not too simple, but it's not too completely complex either. So
Exactly.
you can
Exactly.
make that work.
Right. It's just a belief. And beliefs are built through culture, as we know. And so, a principal can't stand up and say, okay, everybody, let's just believe. It is more complex than that. But I do believe that there's a lot of teachers individually walking around thinking that they have the efficacy of their own teaching. But boy, it gets powerful when you add 30, 40, 50, 70, 100 other teachers into that belief.
Yeah. Well, and you think, Jen, just, collectively and, teachers who have high levels of self-efficacy and collective efficacy actually refer fewer students to special ed. This is because, exactly,
Mhm.
because they believe that they're not done yet, that they haven't
That's right.
exhausted everything and they're willing to come back and continue to try. So they don't form student study teams. As soon as somebody misses an assignment, they're like, oh no, there are other things we can do. So it's a great trait to have, and you can spot those teachers just
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
That's right. I'm a big believer in mindsets. I work hard on my own mindsets. And when I do, I have the opportunity to consult with principals throughout the country as well. And I often try to dig into their mindsets. And when I hear a principal whose mindset is, this is so hard. I don't have time. I don't really understand this rubric I'm supposed to be using to evaluate teachers, that kind of thing. I think that's very different from a mindset that can truly move the needle in terms of instruction. So,
mm.
talk to me with your experience and all the work you do across the country. What are some essential qualities or mindsets that effective instructional leaders carry with them?
Yeah, this is fantastic. So, sometimes when I work with leaders, I always tell them that especially site principals, I'm like, the three most dangerous words a principal can say to their staff is the district says.
Go
And
ahead.
so,
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
and I think that the mindset of principals, I mean, start with like, what's the difference between an average leader and an excellent leader? And what do they do different? If you want a special school, you have to do special things. And so it's not more work, it's just focusing on the things that have the most impact. I think leaders that have a mindset of curiosity, of that relentless pursuit of excellence, make a huge difference. For example, when you know this as well, when you work with schools or principals, you know that the initiatives that I coach people on aren't going to go anywhere unless the leader is the one that's leading it. So you can't wait for me to come back again and say, well, what did you do in between visits? Some of these principles, the mindset is, Steve, I can't wait for you to come back. Wait till you see what we've accomplished. Others just wait for me to come and nothing gets done in between. The other mindset I help leaders try to foster to their teachers is that, when you give assessments or assignments or something that matters, that those assessments are more of a reflection of your instructional effort, not the kids' effort, because we're the adults. That's a visible learning mind frame, by the way. But I feel like the mindset of leaders right now need to focus on the difference between average leadership. Likely, you already have an average school. You'll come into an average school. But to get out of the average, loop, you would have to do some additional special things. And we mentioned that in the book and, the work I do across the country. But I think mindset is huge. I think the mindset should be focused on continuous improvement and
Right.
then sharing your leadership and not burdening every single problem. And then all of a
Right.
sudden we're moving forward. So
That's exactly right. And, regards to those problems, I sometimes coach principals. I say, sometimes there's problems that are not related to what you need to be doing. And those
yeah,
problems, no action is an action. You don't have to address that. I tell them all the time, especially with, teachers fussing with one another or, a problem with what classroom we're going to put a situation, whatever. Those require decision making, but they certainly shouldn't take up all of our mind space when we're
no,
thinking about instruction.
exactly. Exactly.
So let's acknowledge, though, that even with a positive can do mindset, there are a lot of difficulties that our leaders face. Not
Hmm.
only big picture, the current political environment, decisions that are being made about money and schools. What are some of those challenges that you see our leaders facing today, and how do you think we can address them, or what might our listeners find in the book that will help them address those challenges?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of the things that I wrote in the book were to help leaders prevent all the stuff that I did wrong. And,
Right.
and I had a chance to go back and make sure. And I remember being a great proponent of learning, but it wasn't until the last 3 or 4 years that I kind of figured out that I had no monitoring system, no expectations, no goals. Goals motivate people to exert extra
Right.
effort in line with a specific task. And right now I have friends that have no goals in their life and they hit them with amazing accuracy, right? So,
100%.
so I think that, the challenge is providing a system that's really supportive. It's a no fault reflection on our effort, but I think leaders need to know how to effectively implement and evaluate and improve whatever's going on in those schools And then, resourcing strategically, like picking the best people that can help close those gaps. So I kind of mentioned a little bit about overconfidence bias, only because I'm always reminding leaders that this is an overestimation of your progress. And I think you need to be a little bit more humble and step back and make sure that you're there. And that is a big misconception for me, where people think they're fine. But I think what I would recommend is developing a shared narrative in the school, that maximizes the impact on students. And shared means that we get feedback from the people that are implementing these things. And so again, the process is structured, and it's definitely supported. So some of the challenges don't have to be those challenges with the shift in the way you organize and lead. I think some people are very reactionary and they wait. And I think the best way to create an amazing culture is to get out in front. I always tell some of my principal friends, Jen, that they're struggling, they can't get people to do this, and I have a lot of empathy for them. But I also say, you know what? You get the culture you deserve.
Hmm.
You created that culture, or you're in charge of creating a culture that's more receptive. And so it's going to have to start with you. And
Right.
most principals know that things don't get better until they start leading a
Right.
little bit better. So those are some of the things that I help them. When it comes to misconceptions, I think, um, leading a school and assuming everything is going well is
Right.
probably a huge misconception.
Well, and I want to circle back to what you said about goals. I used to be, as a teacher, I would roll my eyes, oh, goals, whatever.
Mhm.
But I have since done a 180 on that. And you said something in your last conversation, or just a minute ago, about if you don't set goals, you meet them with amazing accuracy. And I think that's true of it, bigger picture too. My mom turned 80 this weekend, and I said to her, Mom, it's probably time to stop. She's a potter and she drives into town and teaches pottery class. I'm like, Mom, you're 80. You don't have to do that anymore. And she said, if I stop, I'll get old. And of course, I wanted to laugh and say, well, 80, you might be there. But her point was, I have to have a thing. I have to have a goal. Every
Yeah.
Tuesday, I'm going to go and I'm going to teach this class, and I'm going to set my intentions for how, if we're going to make a mug, if we're going to make a vase, whatever. And that applies to goals that are not set. If we don't have goals, if we don't have a picture of where we're going, we're not going to get there. We're going to get old and stagnant, and then we're going to wonder, well, why aren't we moving the needle? And so talk a little bit more about goals and how we can make them not a checkbox, but something that helps us get somewhere.
Yeah, well, I think no goals equal reduced motivation, because no one's really paying attention of how much progress we're making. But goals don't have to be that complicated, Jen. And you know as well as I do, um, a goal is simply a place where we want to be, and not at the end of the year, but in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Like,
Hmm.
short-term goals lead to long-term impact. I think
Right.
the way schools write goals right now is by the end of the year, we'll show this, this, and this. And I'm like, how about by the end of the month?
Right.
We actually show a little bit more progress towards that. So, and again, goals have some really good effect sizes based on the Hattie research. Like, it's it's set at doubling the speed of progress for both teachers and students. And so I think that without a goal, I just think that people don't really know what they're shooting for. And it's almost connected to action plans. Like, without an action plan, that's a false start. I see so many schools do things before they create a one page. You can write an action plan in one page,
Right. Right.
and you can actually include goals in that action plan, and then you're off to the races. And principals who think that way, like action plans with a monitoring system, because I think if I were a teacher and you asked me to implement PLCs and you never gave me feedback on that, why would I think that's a top priority?
Right.
So I think goal setting is like, well, if you're meeting PLCs, like, if you give a pre and post assessment, how is it going? Are you meeting the proficiency goals you've set between the pre and post? I think goals are really intentional, and they're horribly underused, in
Right.
my opinion. But I think they're a great strategy.
Right. I do too. And I read somewhere that when you write your goals down, you're like twice as likely to
Oh,
to
yeah.
meet them. And I started doing that. I felt really embarrassed actually. I had this little journal and I wrote down some goals for the next, I think it was 5 months, 5 years, whatever. And I went back and I thought, well, kiss my grits, it worked. I think if you write them down and if you
Mm.
publicize them too and say, hey, here's our goals, everybody, that's
Yes.
going to improve the likelihood that you meet them.
I completely agree. And again, it's an easy thing to do, and I think we should be doing it more often. So yes, I
Right.
talk about those a lot
Yeah.
in the book. And so I'm
So
glad
you
you're
mentioned PLCs. Speaking of the book and this
Mhm.
conversation, you mentioned PLCs, and so that's kind of the premise, I think, of how principals, in your eyes, how principals can really maximize the expertise within their team. So talk to me about PLCs and how leaders can assess the success of those teams and their PLC work.
Yeah, and achievement teams is another as a PLC. We just call it an achievement team. But when my wife and I wrote the first book, it was based on four pieces of structure. Like give an assessment and collect and chart that data, then set a goal, then analyze your data, and then think about interventions before you give a post assessment. How would this change your teaching? Steve Barkley is an excellent academic coach, and he told me that the purpose of a PLC and the one question people should be asking themselves is what do our students need us to learn before the end of this meeting? Love that. It's a professional learning community.
Love it.
And in the book, I outline a well-defined structure for successful collaboration. I see people call themselves PLCs, but it looks like
Mhm.
it's just a staff meeting with a new name. And so I think that there has to be a structure. That's why we said, well, give an assessment and analyze that data, and then think about post-assessing after a couple weeks to see what the growth was. But again, I feel like the assessment results should be used to explicitly make informed decisions, and that should change our practice. I mean, I always tell people in your PLCs, you should be appropriating new knowledge by the end of that meeting, not maintaining existing knowledge, and you should sensitively challenge current thinking and practice. Now you have an active professional learning community, and I feel like that's how leaders can lead change in PLCs is by, you know, um, I always say in the book, I said, if you're reading this book, you likely already have a PLC and it's pretty much, I'll bet, average. But
Right.
exceptional PLC just hits different and you can see it. People
Right.
come and they're ready to go, and there's a structured format, and they work with each other to improve practice. And what does a leader have to do? Provide the necessary tools so people can facilitate really innovative collaboration. That's not that hard.
Right.
So we talk about all different ways to do that, but those are some things. I think a really well-defined structure for a PLC, and then leaders not micromanaging, but sitting in and asking the team, like, what can I do to help support this would be a great way to launch even better collective efficacy.
Right. Well, I'm going to use that, what you just said. I have a meeting later this morning, and I'm going to go in, and my job in this meeting is to be a leader, but also not to micromanage. And so I'm going to use those words you just did. What's the learning that's going to come out of this? When we
Right.
walk
Yeah.
away, how are we going to be more able to solve a problem, more knowledgeable, more confident, whatever it is? I think that's a great way to kind of set the stage. When we
Yeah.
leave, how are we going to be better?
That's it. It's a
That's
good
it.
focus, right? It really gets people to go from a floodlight to a flashlight. Like now, you said that, and every time I use that quote from Barkley about what do our kids need us to learn by the end of this meeting, it's a focus. It just gets people back to the focus area of the meeting,
Right.
and then we're like, okay, so
Right.
yeah.
So in a meeting, I'm thinking too about that. And, what outcome do we want from this meeting? Where do you see reflection fitting into PLC work? Because we want to move forward. We want to have outcomes. We want to have goals. At which point in the process do we stop and say, wait, let's look at what we've already done? Or should that be minimal?
No, I think people need more work on how to reflect.
Hmm.
And I wrote a little bit about that as well. And meaningful reflection means that the leaders should be able to share their own moments of missteps or when they change their perspectives or when they've learned. So everybody else is more encouraged to talk about the same thing. And
Right.
so I think that meaningful reflection, which, like again, you asked about going beyond the agenda, means that why are we doing this? And let's
Right.
go back before we follow the structured process and make sure, we understand why we're meeting as a PLC. And overall, it's to increase relational trust, professionalism, student achievement, and the fact that we're innovative and we can do innovative things. But I think we should be learning from the work, not just doing the work. And I
Right.
feel like that would be the reflection piece. There's a lot, so much research about self-reflection. And most of the time I do it when I make a mistake. I don't really look at self-reflection sometimes like that's something I should be continuing to do. So I think
Right.
leaders can encourage really good reflection by even again sharing their own moments of
Right.
how their perspective has changed.
Right. I coined a term that makes absolutely no sense, but I'd like to trademark it, and that is proactive reflection.
Hmm.
And that's what I think my role as a leader is when I walk into a PLC. I want to proactively think about where we need to look back. So, just as an example, if we have data we're breaking down, I get myself in a mindset where I say, okay, they're gonna want to talk about behaviors. They're going to want to talk about all the barriers. Okay, Jen, be ready for that. Give
Hmm.
them that time and then figure out how to say, okay, acknowledged, absolutely true, but what does this data say about us moving forward? So there's kind of that proactive work that happens before you look back, if that makes sense.
It does
Yeah,
completely.
yeah. And I also think I had coffee with a young administrator yesterday, and she was in a very vulnerable place, not feeling like she was being successful. I think this girl has an incredible path forward as a leader, but she needed her confidence build up a little bit. And one of the things that she said is, I feel confused a lot because I feel like some of our veteran teachers and leaders are roaring ahead because they have a whole body of reflective knowledge of things
Mm.
that hasn't worked. And I don't have that knowledge. These are my words, not hers. So I feel inadequate and incompetent. So you and I didn't plan for this conversation at all, but how do we help our new educators, whether those are leaders or teachers, catch up to the reflection that has already maybe been done by years of work? That's a tough question, I know.
It is, but I still think that I think mindful leadership is based on just how can we continue to enhance our school culture. So I go to places that are broken. I feel so bad that they can't get the progress they deserve. I'm talking to like
Right.
$1 million worth of education, and the issue with a lot of our new leaders is the internal politics and an
Yes.
organizational culture that refuses to change. This is the
Right.
challenge they have.
Right.
And so these are things that you can slowly chip away at. But I think so many new challenging things. Jen, when I was a principalship, there was no COVID. There wasn't
Right.
there wasn't. I mean, most of it was, and the theme, because I'm a little older, is managing. The theme was managing, and
Yep.
the instructional leadership was just starting to turn the page, like Mike Schmoker and some of these other authors. It was like all of a sudden it was like this is a different thing than I learned when I was getting pre-service training. So I think I don't know how much that's evolved, but I think our leaders are stepping into things that they should be well aware of how to handle, and they need more mentoring,
Right.
coaching, and but I feel like there's school leadership is so complex, but leaders are being torn away from instructional leadership, and they're doing things that don't really have an impact on learning. There's so much research
Right.
like what's the number one indicator that can contribute to student growth is leaders who learn with teachers, not sponsor learning for others.
Right.
So many times I see my principal friends arrange for PD and leave the room. I'm like, I think the optics here are really bad.
Right. Right.
So, these are some things that overall, because that's, that was a tough question, but
Right. Well,
but those are
well,
some
that's
of the issues.
right. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about this incredible point my friend David James makes. He's an ASCD author and works for NSK 12. They do a lot of consulting work. And he says that he goes and he talks to many different staff and principal teams. And he says, everyone says the same thing. They say, we hate change. We don't want anything to change.
Yeah.
And we want things to get better. Well, you can't have things get better unless you have change. And so I kind of stole that and I will actually use those words. I'll say, listen, I know you don't want anything to change, but I also know you want things to get better. So how can we get things better if we don't want change? And it does make people kind of chuckle a little because they'll say that, yeah, I want things to get better, but don't change anything.
It's
it's
true.
a,
I
it's a
mean,
good
I
point.
think growth is painful, so is change, but
Right.
nothing is as painful as being stuck in a place you don't
That's right.
belong.
That's right.
And
Yep.
so, and also, Jen, you reminding me, like people resist change because they may not be negative or toxic people. They just want to know that change is worth it. So
Exactly.
we have to make a compelling case for change before we just say, and guess what we're doing now, which was
Yes,
another mistake
exactly.
I used to make.
Exactly.
So, but wow, what a great point, great observation too.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So let me wrap up with this question, Steve. You have a significant body of work out there beyond this current book that we've talked about. You even,
Mhm.
I believe, have a quick reference guide out there, right?
Yes.
Yes. So somebody told me, I'm trying to think of who, maybe Jay McTeague from ASCD, that quick reference guides are harder to write than books because they're about 1,500 words. And I thought, oh, that's silly. Well, I'm going to try it. So I proposed a QRG, and I would agree it's very difficult to write all of that content in 1,500 words. So
Mm.
tell us about your quick reference guide, and then tell us about some of the other work that you want our listeners to know is out there from you.
Yeah, the QRG that I wrote for Achievement Teams, the first book, really is the outline of the 4 steps. And, that's a tri-page fold out with, 6 pages.
6 panels.
And
Yep.
it was a lot of fun, but you got to get it down,
Right.
right? Because, I mean, I have the curse of the conscientious. Like, I wanted to put everything in there and you can't.
Me too.
So, ASCD will help you with that.
Yes. Yes, they will make it. They will make it happen somehow.
Um,
It's
but
hard to do.
yeah, the QRG was really a fun project to work on. And I think that, it's a way that helps supplement the book if you get the
Right.
book. But
Good.
other bodies of work that I focus on are really high yield instructional strategies like teacher clarity, learning intention, success criteria, metacognition, micro teaching. Really focus on uh, probability based instructional strategies, again, through visible learning. So we have 50 plus instructional strategies on our website that are really, really well done and produced. And they're available for just, a free download. You can take a look at all these things. And we encourage teachers to use those in their PLCs. The other thing that, a lot of the work we do is nonprofit too, where we go into schools. I mean, our whole theme for our consulting company is service before profit. So we don't mind, working with schools or districts or providing extra support um, through webinars or Zooms and everything else. And nobody's name goes on a subscription list or anything else. It's just, we just, love doing that work for people, especially if they're interested in learning more about how to improve the culture they're building. But I still think that those things are are key support areas that we need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the other things that we have in place
Excellent.
that are really really fun to deliver and coach with teams.
Right.
Struggling, they want solutions, and so as well as I do, a solutions based consultant can be a really good shot in the arm for.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the fun work, right? When you
Yeah,
go in and you say, here's some actions you can take. It's not just sit around and be motivated, but here's some actual
right,
actions,
right,
right?
exactly.
So you mentioned your website, which is rich, rich, rich with a lot of materials. And so that I make sure that our listeners here, tell them about your website. Where can they find you there?
Yeah, it's just steveventura.com. This name Advanced Collaborative Solutions I came up with, I get so much feedback like, what, that is a long name. I'm like, I don't know why I did that. And now I can't get rid of it.
Right.
I was thinking about changing my URL to something about Advanced Collaborative Solutions, but I just stayed with
No.
steveventura.com. That's what people look for.
Right.
And
Right.
so on that website, there is a resources link, and there are so many available resources and downloads. And again, we don't capture emails and follow up. There's a mailing list, obviously, if you want to join our mailing list. And even that is not hard sell. It just says where we're going to be and what we're doing. But I would suggest people take a look at that. I think that there's a study guide on there for our books as well. If I haven't done it yet, I'll put it up there. But it's a great place to go just if you want to know more about our work or more about collective efficacy and collaboration. So
Perfect.
easy to find.
Well, and I applaud you. Just steveventura.com. I did the same. A dear friend gave me advice. Just call your website your name because that's
Yeah.
what they're looking for anyway. So well done on that one.
I feel
And
lucky I got the name. I was thinking,
right.
maybe someday a really rich Steve Ventura would contact me and say, I'd like to buy your URL, but nobody's reached out. Nobody wants it.
Nobody wants your name.
So
That's good. That's
I
good.
get to keep it.
Well, this has been so fun, Steve. And for our listeners, log on to williamdparker.com. You will find show notes. You will find all the links to find Steve, although it's not hard. Again, find his website. You can find him on LinkedIn. So much fun, Steve. Thank you so much. And I'm sure our paths are going to cross
I hope so. This
soon.
was really, really terrific.
Yeah, so fun. Okay, thanks everyone. And again, go to the website and you can find more links to find Steve Ventura. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.